Hello and welcome to the program. I am Imonia Marere. For 4 days this month of August 2022, Accra, the Ghanaian capital, hosted an international summit on transatlantic slave trade and reparations with the theme Advancing Justice, Reparations and Racial Healing. The summit attracted participants from the global black world and ignited a process that is intended to revive and revamp rigorous global and continental advocacy and campaigns for reparative justice, as well as collective healing for Africans and people of African descent. The conference was focused on a demand for a global black identity, that is, identifying how slavery, colonialism and racism intersect and impact lives of black people across the world. Organizers of the summit said recent racist acts and the consequent protests around the world have changed global perspectives, conversations, contents, and the dynamics on systemic racism and reparations for slavery, colonialism, and mass historical crimes. The Accra Summit therefore discussed and examined options for addressing the gaps in the hitherto uncoordinated campaigns, interventions, and strategies for the demand for reparations, fostering racial healing and justice, and of course, restoring the dignity of the black person around the world. This includes the involvement of the African Union, the AU, in the demand for restitution for stolen African religious symbols, cultural artifacts, relics, and the recognition of the African diaspora community. The big challenge, however, is how to secure a commitment from the influential European players to push for a process of reparatory justice from governments, financial institutions, and cooperations from emerging African reparations commissions. Nigeria was represented at the Accra Summit by government officials and one of Nigeria's renowned cultural icons. Our discourse today will therefore revolve around the renewed agitation for reparations and the quest to create a global black identity. We will meet our guests right after now. Stay with us. I'm joined in the studio now by two Nigerians who were at the Accra Summit. First, from my immediate left is Barrister Babatunde Adebiyi. Barrister Adebiyi is the Director, Legal Services, National Commission for Museums and Monuments. And we are also joined by Comrade Ta Uko. Comrade Uko is a veteran broadcast journalist, a Pan-African cultural activist, and a musical artist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Moni.
Right.
Thank you for having us.
Let's begin by taking a look at what the Accra Summit was all about. Whose initiative was it, and why were you in attendance?
Well, the Accra Summit, as you rightly expressed in your beginning statement, is a revival of an old theme that was left fallow for a long time. The slave trade, a thorough critique and discourse on the European transatlantic slave trade, and the quest for reparation by Africans, from Africans, within the continent of Africa and outside the continent of Africa. And you know, historically, the trajectory has been moving from the Atlantic slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, to colonialism. And now, some would arguably say, directly neocolonialism. So the factors that inhibited the development of Africa, leading to our gross underdevelopment, can be traced back to the slave trade, and now the colonial experience and the withdrawal, the forceful extraction of surplus from Africa and from African peoples in the colonies, where you have British interests, Spanish interests, German interests, Italian interests, Portuguese interests, and French interest. So the reparation quest is a new impetus from the Africans, not in diaspora, because the concept of diaspora is only limited to nationals of, say, Nigeria, who are outside. We can call them diasporans because they are Nigerians outside the specific space. Those who are Africans, who live in those countries, who are autochthonous to those communities, original, aboriginals, they are Africans, not in diaspora. They are what we call the global Africans. So it is bringing all these interest groups from civil society, the AU, and mainly MacArthur Foundation. You had also the ATGLF in Accra, and a lot of human rights activists and social movements in the United States, North America, the Caribbean, and of course Nigeria. I represented Nigeria from the cultural angle, and my comrade from the National Commission for Museums and Monuments came from the government side. But basically, this is the crux of how do we move forward? What are the things that belong to us that other people are holding on to? In a new world, if you don't ask of your thing being returned to you, no one will do that. So Africans and Africa are beginning to stand up to say, this is our right, and this is the right time to ask for a return of those things that belong to us.
But Adebi, this conference or this summit was themed Global Circle for Reparations. Reparations is not a new terminology. It's not a new concept. It's been on the table, and it's been there for decades, except that after a while, or for some time now, it's been lying fallow, so to say. Nobody seems to be talking about it. Then, all of a sudden, in 2022, there is a reparations summit in Accra. How did we come about that? This revival, where did that spirit come from?
Thank you, and thank you very much. Reparation now, in the form of restitution, that is, getting back things that were taken from you, has been on for a long while, and like you said, there was a lull for a while. However, apparently, influenced by two circumstances, the Black Lives Matter movement, which was so prominent about a year or two ago in the US and certain parts of Europe, and of course, Nigerian repatriation efforts. Nigeria is the leading country now in the globe concerning repatriation of artifacts and cultural objects. And probably that is what influenced the organizers of this event to invite Nigeria to come and address the issue. I think these two phenomena influenced the organizers to have a surge, a new beginning, I would want to call it, about reparation. Thank you.
So this has some sort of government endorsement with your participation, with government's approval to participate at the Accra Summit?
Yes. Nigeria is highly respected in Africa and globally, particularly when it comes to the issue of cultural heritage. The Benin bronzes, the Ife bronzes and terracotta, the Nok terracotta, and Ugbo are known globally. So, and you will agree with me, probably, that Nigeria seems, apart from Egypt, to be the focus of cultural heritage objects in Africa. So, of course, Nigeria was invited fully, and the government was in support. Mind you, sir, it was the president of the Republic of Ghana that declared the event open. And probably my colleague will want to mention one or two things that he said concerning the efforts of Africa, and particularly our country, relating to these issues.
Comrade, you talked about this being a global summit of black persons. That seems to indicate that it was not just people on the African continent that attended, and that blacks from other parts of the world were at this conference. Let's look at the participation at this conference. Where were these participants drawn from?
Mainly the participants came from the United States, the Caribbean countries, Latin America, England, and as far as Sweden. Africans in Sweden came for this conference. And the important factor in bringing together people of black descent is that for them, they don't need governments to prod them to fight for the recognition of Africa and its place in contemporary history from its past. And the new concept of global African is now the dominant theme. It's subscribed to by the AU, the ECOWAS sub-region, and other sub-regional bodies that are also determined to harness an Africanness, a common identity, which has never been done since after Festac. You know, Festac brought us together to reclaim, as it were, a common cultural heritage as people of African descent and Africans. And since then, the instability of African nations themselves, coup d'etats, instability in governance, led to the anti-apartheid struggle, took a lot of our attention away from this confronting what I would call imperialism at the level of slavery, slave trade, colonialism, and neocolonialism. It's interesting that I met the son of Marcus Garvey, the founder, the founding icon of Pan-Africanism in the whole world. Marcus Garvey's son is Dr. Julius Garvey. He came to the conference as one of the strong pillars supporting the Pan-African movement. So Ghana too. Why Ghana? That's what we should be asking. Why Ghana? Because Ghana has taken it as a political and economic philosophy to promote the return to Africa by those Africans in the diaspora and those Africans who are global Africans to come back to any part of Africa they choose to immerse themselves into the cultural identity of those persons and find a common cause. So it's from all over the world. And remember, part of the debate is how do we include the next session, the next outing of this movement. It's now a movement. It's not just one person any longer, but with equal female participation, male participation, civil society, human rights activists, and global charity organizations and other Western-based organizations that fund and support international programs of development like MacArthur Foundation.
So the criteria for attendance was simply that you were an African, a black African, and you were interested in the reparations struggle. That was basically the criteria for attending. But the question has been asked, were you not, participants at that conference, not simply talking to yourselves, because you did not invite those who perpetrated slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and all the racial crises that we've seen in the world. The main actors in that process were not part of this conference. The demands that will be made for reparative justice, for instance, will only now be transmitted to them. So were you not simply just talking to yourselves?
No.
At the Accra Summit?
No, first you need a collective racial, geopolitical consensus. It's the people of African descent and Africans, what the South Africans call Indaba. In Tiv language, we call it Diu, Nkoho, coming together to accept something as what we present to the world. You remember, it's been a long time this issue of reparation was raised since Festac. So coming together is to aggregate the thinking of different African formations For instance, India. India has the largest population of black people on earth, or people of African descent. The present president, a newly elected president of India, so one of the tribal communities, they are called tribal communities, Murma. It's a lady from one of the indigenous Indian blacks. There are blacks in India, over 200 million of them. So you have blacks also in Brazil, but these are from the, slave trade angle. The ones in India are not from the slave trade era. They are not taken there because they went as slaves, as chattels. No. You have Papua New Guinea, you have Fiji, you have even in New Zealand. So you have autochthonous African societies, African civilizations that already existed before even the slave trade. Take Queen of Sheba of Abyssinia, ancient Ethiopia, of today's Ethiopia. Queen of Sheba in her time, over 3,000 years ago, was sending her black African clergy and professors to go and train and educate people in the Sabian history and religion in India. So first, like I said, is we as a family. Can we agree on what we want? Can we agree on the things we want to harness from the West? What do we mean by reparations? Remember, it was black people that sold their brothers and sisters as slaves. The kings, what we call the local bourgeoisie of the time. The kings, the princes, the royal houses, the elite. These were the people, the powerful military types that sold fellow blacks to white European slave traders. How do we do this atonement? If we don't forgive ourselves, how do we forgive Europeans? So we needed to put these things together and to separate diasporans from Nigeria going out to earn a living from those who were taken out to slavery and want to come back home, and they can stay anywhere they want to. So it's for governments to develop their own policies and see how these things can be aided. And finally, in that same strand of trying to dichotomize issues that are concrete so that we don't blab when we meet the other side. For instance, what are to be repatriated? You have cultural artifacts, iconic religious symbols. You also have human remains. These were the colonialists. Lumumba's tooth, gold tooth, when he was incinerated in acid, the Belgians took Lumumba's tooth and displayed it and kept it there for over 100 years. Why? They have kept it there to promote their own tourism. Come see black man, come see how it be. In Botswana, women were taken to Europe and put in cage because they had large bum. They had what they call gigantes, very large persons. People like that died out of frustration. So a lot of these things have happened. In Ghana, one of the Ashanti chiefs was beheaded for resistance against the slave trade, and they took his head to their country. It's just been returned. So various European countries have their own aberrations for what they stole from Africa. We're trying to be very clear. The English is, they stole our things. You thief my thing. Return them to me, plus the interest. Because those things were kept in museums. And people went to museums and paid monies for over 300 years. So you just don't return my pot to me that I borrowed you or you seized to go and cook, and you bring it destroyed and say, this is your pot. So in putting it in that simple street lingo is to say, Africans first understand yourselves. So when we meet the Europeans who stole our things from Africa and dehumanized our societies, underdeveloped us till today, we know what we are
So
asking.
is this the expectation that this summit is going to coordinate all the different groups that have been seeking reparative justice from the Western world over the years? Is this likely to weld them together, to form them into a collective and one united front?
Yes, why not? Because I even argued that, listen, after Ghana, come to Nigeria. We will be willing to host you because this has been our baby. The Festac was our baby, and since Nigeria hosted Festac, nobody has done it. After Obasanjo's regime, no one has held Festac. So now that the blacks in America and the blacks in Europe and all over the world are saying, hey, let's speak as one family. More persons will join, but we're hoping that in the not far future, with my comrade from the ministry, the museum, they're working very hard, bringing commitment to artifacts, historical symbols coming back home. More importantly is the psychology of re-educating our people to value themselves, because there are forms of modern slavery that we cannot run away from. Now Africans voluntarily migrate, forced migration to Europe, because we have been underdeveloped, and the African emigre who tries to run away to Europe is doing that not because he loves white people, but because he thinks life is better there. So it's a regrouping, it's a reassessment of how far has this journey gone? Mm-hmm. Who is willing to be part of this? And it is for us to mobilize. By the way, Europeans came, scholars, progressives came. They are white progressives. We were far, far revolutionary than even our African pretenders who claim to be Pan-Africanists or whatever. So remember that Marcus Garvey will be was one of the principal motivators of Return to Africa movement, the Pan-African movement that influenced Zeke, Nkrumah, Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Nelson Mandela. All these were people influenced by the great Marcus Garvey. So it's a coming home. It's a coming home. And trying to understand, now that we are here, how do we face the world as a unit, such that we are not exploited a second time with gimmicks of societies that claim to love us.
Barrister Adebiyi, let's talk a bit about the cultural artifacts, the religious symbols, and all the other cultural relics that have been domiciled in the West for hundreds of years. Only recently, the British government agreed to, and in fact did return some of the artifacts to the Benin Kingdom. You earlier on spoke about all the other cultural centers in Nigeria that are also seeking the return of such religious and cultural symbols and artifacts to this country. Now, how huge is the number of these artifacts and cultural symbols and relics that we're talking about, that were looted from different parts of Nigeria or indeed from different parts of Africa at the time of slavery, of slave trade and colonialism, that we are seeking to return?
Quite huge. However, I believe I have to make a point. We don't think it is the policy of the British government to repatriate Nigerian antiquities or antiquities of other nations. The repatriation that we have witnessed, that is, from Jesus College, University of Cambridge, and from the University of Aberdeen, came from institutions in the United Kingdom. So they are independent institutions. They do not belong, in that sense, to the British government. Also, we are working.
But would that have been possible without the approval and say-so of the British government?
Okay.
As independent as the institutions are, there still has to be a process.
Yeah, there are nuances in different nations. The situation probably with Nigerian universities are not the same situations with the British universities. The United Kingdom government cannot, and I'm saying it emphatically, dictate to the University of Cambridge or to the University of Oxford For example, we're about to witness repatriation from the University of Oxford. That is from Pitt Rivers Museum of the University of Oxford. As well, we are working with the Ashmolean Museum in the United Kingdom. Pitt Rivers sent our request after a lot of, conversation and, well, almost, I could say, agitation from the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. And after considering all the legal factors, they sent our request to the committee, what we call the Senate of the university. Each and every professor had a vote. Majority said this thing should be returned to Nigeria. And they said, okay, we are going to return them to Nigeria. Soon, if I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, you will hear the announcement concerning this. That tells you that, the university system there is a bit different. Probably you heard from the Honeyman Museums and Garden last week that they are going to return 72 Benin bronzes to Nigeria. Of course, the chairman of the board was appointed by the government of the United Kingdom to the board of that museum. But, he only has a vote, and that is if there is no, the two sides are equal. But majority said we are returning these things to Nigeria. So he cannot, or she, in this case, cannot say, oh, we are not, because the British government has a different opinion. However, concerning the British Museum, for example, the British Museum was set up by an act of parliament of the United Kingdom, the British Parliament. So they cannot make a decision except that parliament, they follow the dictate of the legislation that set it up, which is the British Museum Act of 1963, which has some requirements that to them, Nigeria and all other countries definitely cannot meet. And that is another issue to probably discuss some other day. So sincerely, I cannot say British government can tell certain institutions. And to those institutions, we have really, we are discussing and we are getting results. The ones that can be influenced by the British government, well, we are going through some other routes, which is not, it will take a higher level of officials to announce that, not here. Thank you.
So we are, as a country or as a people, expecting more of these cultural artifacts back from the different places where they have been domiciled for some hundreds of years.
Yes. Like I mentioned, the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is a museum of the University of Oxford, they are planning to return 116 Benin bronzes. So we are making arrangements towards this. This is an example. And of course, in the United States, we have not fixed the exact date, but definitely this year, the Smithsonian is going to return many Nigerian artifacts. Also, the National Gallery of Art. These two institutions I have mentioned they were institutions belonging, let me use the expression belonging, to the United States. So it doesn't mean that it's the United States government or, the United States government that says they should return these things. But they are independent as well. After considering our arguments, they have concurred with us that this thing ought to go back to Africa. Each museum, each institution must make a decision by itself. Some, of course, will be influenced by the act or the legislation setting them up. Some, it will be onerous, difficult for us to achieve, but ultimately, we think we are going to achieve something about that. Some will be easier. You just have to study the legislation, then know how to go about it.
Well, again, another issue that we will have to look at is how this renewed effort at seeking reparative justice is going to help that process that we are talking about. But let's go on this break. When we return, we shall talk about that. I thank you so much for staying with us. My guests in the studio are Comrade Uko a veteran broadcast journalist, a Pan-African cultural activist, and a musical artist. He's been joined by Barrister Babatunde Adebiyi, who is the Director of Legal Services, National Commission for Museums and Monuments, both of whom were at the Accra Summit on reparations and the renewed efforts, a revival of the long-standing efforts at getting reparations for Africa and Africans who were victims of slavery and victims of colonialism in that era. And of course, all of us who are alive today are probably offsprings of these Africans who were at one time or one stage or the other victims of the colonial intervention or adventure into Africa. Barrister Adebiyi, let me come back to you, and let's start from where we stopped before the break, and that's talking about the return of these artifacts, this renewed effort, this revival of the restitutive justice that we talk about. How much of that is going to help in the quest to get these symbols, these artifacts, these relics back into Africa? The Nigerian government, through your commission, has been doing so much. I mean, it gladdens a lot of people's hearts to hear that a lot, hundreds, as it were, of these artifacts are being brought back to Nigeria. But how much of that effort will be helped by this new effort that has been set out in Accra?
I think the way things look now, they're going to be like Siamese twins. Like I said, when I first started with you on this program, I said probably one of the things that influenced the organizer of the Accra event to invite Nigeria was the repatriation effort, which has acquired global acclaim now, the repatriation effort of Nigeria. So just like that was helpful, I mean, that was a cause for them to have invited us. Of course, this renewed agitation after a long lull is going to be very helpful to our cause as well. However, a little bit of distinction. Reparation and repatriation now, just a bit of distinction. It will take the Nigerian government as a policy to state a position about reparation. The Nigerian government has stated its position about repatriation. We are part of bringing things back, which are property of Nigeria. That is repatriation. Like I said when we began this program, I said restitution. That is, well, almost like compensation, not exactly compensation now, will have to be announced later as a government policy. But in aligning the situation with what you have, the question that you have asked me, I think this will probably influence the policy-making procedure of the national government to announce this as soon as possible. Thank you.
Comrade Uko, an aspect of this whole process is what the Accra Summit referred to as racial healing. What is that supposed to mean?
Racial healing from the positions advanced at the Accra Reparations Summit is first, like I said, we are all of the human race. There's no black race, there's no white race. Race is a species of creation. Now, it is the ethnicity of certain persons of that human society, that racial group called human beings, that have tormented and denigrated and stolen the developmental focus of others. So the healing, like I said, comes from first we Africans. We went to Badagry I was in Badagry in January 2021. And I went to where they call the point of no return, where a big slave trader had his barracoons, where slaves were kept. Alhaji Abbas Williams. Now, he was a great slave trader from Ijebuland, Abeokuta axis. And having made so much success of slave trading, he was kidnapped and sent to Brazil as a slave himself. So the slave trader became the slave. And they went there and trained him on how he can bring more slaves to Brazil. And he came back and settled himself as a master slave trader and became a wealthy billionaire by the standards of the time. Now, in the end, with the end of slavery, slave trade, he had to go back to, I think he went back to Ijebu-Ode or Abeokuta, that area. But what struck me is the underdevelopment of Badagry. Why has this port, where people made so much money and sold their brothers and sisters, why has it remained at this level of underdevelopment and spiritual backwardness? I take an instance from Ade Ajayi, the great Nigerian historian. He had said, what we need is an African spiritual healing process. That if you watch all port cities where the slave trade took place, the blood and the ghost of all those people they sold out and got drowned in their ports are crying for restitution. So what am I saying? Whether we believe in the spiritual side of things or not, there must be a psychological regroupment coming together to say, na true, we no do well. So who are those to reparate? First, the racial healing is we forgiving ourselves. But you don't steal my stuff or my thing, and I catch you and you say, okay, na true, forgive me, I am sorry. You have to return that thing to me in such a state that I can use it. So our thesis at the Accra Summit is to see how we can advance at the cultural level of integrating African economies working for their purpose. For instance, in Nigeria, UNESCO had this talk about slave routes. But talking about slave route as UNESCO annual program is really of no use economically to the political economy of the GDP, the development of Nigeria. What I am envisaging, and I'm going to help champion in this country, is look, all our slave routes should be marked. So we work with the museums. We now recreate those slave markets like Arochukwu, the Long Juju, recreate the market and set up craft centers, set up a cultural hall of atonement, a performance arena, and where you manufacture clothes, arts, and crafts, and it services the tourism market. Ghana is thriving with tourism. It's tied to the national economy. So whilst we civil society people fight for this psychological involvement of the populace, we also must be looking at how do we make money now from those places that we create wealth. Otherwise, the communities that were in Arochukwu at the time of the slave trade may have migrated, but people are still there. King Jajo of Upobo was a slave boy that became king, but he came from Ami Igbo in Imo State. He was an Igbo boy. He isn't Kalabari or whatever. So what do we want to do? We want it can be a musical. Apartheid used music. They use culture to argue against apartheid and fight white racism. So we intend to use culture, exhibitions, musical concerts, symposia, talking to the younger generation, not these old people or people of my age, no. We must speak history back to our children. If you say slave trade, they will think it happened at the time of Jesus Christ. They will not understand. But if we bring it to their contemporary reality and show why they're even running to Europe now for economic survival, is because these resources were taken away from us. So the slave routes, we have so many slave routes. Do you realize that in Nigeria, from Mambila Plateau, slaves were brought down to Marhai. Marhai is of the Kulere people in Wamba area of Nasarawa State. It has the second deepest waterfall in Africa, Kurmahamu Church. That's Ferinrua Falls. They had a salt route there from Kiana. Salt was taken through that route to supply the areas of Mambila and then to Cameroon. And that area had slaves in return. Plateau slaves, Benue slaves were taken from there also into Cameroon, and finally Tiv slaves, Igede slaves. So those people had to be very militant, and that explains why today it's very difficult to go and enslave them and say you want them to be this or you want them to be that. So what is our history? Our history is knowing who we are, where we are coming from, where do we want to go. So the slave route for me is a passionate thing. Over 15, 20 years now, I've been dreaming of when do we have a clear understanding of where we are the slave markets. Here in Enugu, Abakwanike, there's a slave market there. Why has it not been developed as an historical museum and developed by the state? So you have partnership of the state with individual entrepreneurs who are into culturepreneurship and also developing and creating jobs. If you had a slave market where, for instance, if it's in the West, you teach them how, you set up communities there of traders who are weavers. They weave cloth. You have tailors. So the value chain of the culture industry, bead making, those are things that are made and sent abroad to our partners who are Africans in other countries of the world to market our products, and monies come back to the rural areas. So it's a progressive area of a political economy of slave trade.
Is that something that the Commission, for instance, is looking at, exploiting? Because as it is now, you just spoke about the repatriation of these artifacts. They are coming back home. What is probably going to happen is that they are kept in some obscure museums somewhere. Some of these museums no longer attract as much tourism as they used to be. I remember that growing up, museums used to be big attractions. You went to the museum at the Ring Road in Benin, for instance, at that time, and it was like a big pride to the community there at that time. But not so much. You go to the museum, there used to be a traveling museum in Jos. I don't know the state it is right now, but is the Commission hoping to exploit these new opportunity that is being presented with the repatriation of these artifacts now, to rev up this, what he describes as cultural entrepreneurship?
Thank you very much. Well, I will suggest a visit to the National Museum Benin now, and you will witness a lot of improvement. Thanking, in all sincerity, the Smithsonian Museum. What happened was that there was a great photographer of Benin origin, S.O. Alonge. His work, his photography, was about the most popular photographer in that part of Africa at a point, when photography was still new. His work found their way to the United States, particularly to the Smithsonian Museums. They traced it back, and because of this, they chose now to renovate their museum with the assistance of the locals there, including the government and the rulership. They renovated that place, and it is fantastic. But it is like, it's work in progress. The federal government is going to support this repatriation effort as well soon by increasing the capacity of that museum and other stakeholders. And apart from that, I think it will be announced soon further upgrading that will happen in Benin generally from all angles. Then concerning the issue of the commerce in culture, I will call it, the Commission has gone far in respect of this. For example, in Calabar, we have the Slave History Museum, which is highly regarded in that area, with a committee called Friends of the Museum functioning, and they are the elites of that area. It could bring you sorrow, but in a way it could bring you joy that Nigeria could make such a thing. And sincerely, I respect the opinion of my colleague here today. for identifying the issue of slave routes. But this is not the time to really go into this, but from Cameroon to Calabar, the commission, that's the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, has traced the route of slaves from the Cameroon to Calabar. Something that will surprise you is that many towns and villages in Cameroon bear the same name as villages on that route. Why that happened will be researched into. So then, discussing about this huge number, and there are in thousands that we are expecting, we are making provisions to receive them, and considering that they have now acquired, like I said before, a wide acclaim globally, we will, some, with the support of all stakeholders, will go on international exhibition, touring exhibition, under serious and adequate security. So we hope, the world is expecting it. Imagine if certain institutions or museums had Benin bronzes, and certain ones had been angling to have same bronzes for exhibition, and they never had it. Now that we have acquired it, and they are now ours, legal transfer is taking place all over, physical transfer soon. We plan, in agreement with all stakeholders, like I said, to move these things around the world. Some of them, this will bring tourists en masse to Nigeria, and particularly to places all over the nation that will be hosting these antiquities.
And bring some foreign exchange too.
Certainly, which we really need.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Well, but very quickly, in 60 seconds.
Yes.
Comrade, is it possible, looking at the global structure and systems right now, that this initiative, this new effort, is going to receive some kind of sympathy and support from across the world?
Well, like I said, tendencies, new paradigms are coming up. Younger generations are more agreeable now. The world is a global place. On the internet, whatever, they are seeing what's happening all over the world. So the youth, we have to indoctrinate our youths back into those paradigmal things that made our communities vibrant, gave us dignity. That's why I said, not just having the slave routes mapped, but putting up markets in that place, and then attaching some form of historical reference and chairs in school. Why can't we study Benin bronze in University of Benin and place a chair there? So at the academic level in schools, as we fight to return history and we bring back history, we settle in those areas of cultural history and educate our coming generation, the younger ones, because if you bring these artifacts back with their iconic selves, and a child does not know what this is all about, they just take it and throw it away. That, oh, this is now our grandpapa, their things, ancestral things. And because the white man has said some are fetishes, they are pagan objects, while they go and showcase in their countries and make billions, our children have to be told that these are not fetish objects. If they are traditional religion, iconic images of worship, it's correct. We have one God. So whether Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, traditional religion, Odugbom local, Swem, they are all religion, all now one God. So that's the working with the government, but like I said, we'll be very active on the cultural front. And we'll work with traditional institutions.
Thank you so much. Well, Comrade Tauko, veteran broadcast journalist, Pan-African cultural activist, and a musical artist. He's joined by Barrister Babatunde Adebiyi, who is the Director, Legal Services, the National National Commission for Museums and Monuments. Both of them were, in fact, at the August Accra Summit, at which reparations and, as Barrister Adebiyi puts it, repatriation of African looted objects and were, in fact, effectively discussed. Gentlemen, I want to thank you immensely for finding time to join us here on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, and for you, our viewers, we thank you for investing your time with us. We look forward to being with you again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.